The stars had always called to humanity. For centuries, people had looked at the night sky and wondered what lay beyond. When faster-than-light travel was discovered, the question was finally answered. Humanity was not alone. Across the vast ocean of space, other civilizations thrived, some advanced and graceful, others cold and warlike. The first meetings with alien species were cautious but peaceful. Small trade agreements were made, knowledge was exchanged, and humanity felt hopeful. Yet among the many civilizations, there was one that did not look at Earth with curiosity or respect. They looked with disdain. The Valorians were an ancient empire. Their ships had sailed the stars long before humanity had learned how to shape metal. They were tall, scaled, and sharp-eyed, their movements smooth like predators. Their empire stretched across hundreds of systems, and their history was written in domination. They believed strength was proof of worth. Weakness was proof of nothingness. When news reached them that a young species from a dangerous blue world had entered the stars, they laughed. Another fragile race, they said in their councils. Another people who will bend or break when tested. They wanted proof. The capture on the small outpost of Soria Prime, a joint research station, had been established. Scientists from Earth worked alongside friendly alien scholars, studying strange minerals in the region. The station was peaceful, filled with voices of learning. Among the crew was Alara Mendez, a 21-year-old student from Earth. She was bright, curious, and still amazed by the sight of alien skies. The Valorian warship arrived without warning. Its shadow fell over the station like a black wing. Before any message could be sent, the outpost was surrounded. Valorian soldiers stormed in, swift and silent. Their weapons shone with deadly light, but they did not fire. They did not want destruction. They wanted a subject. Ilara was chosen. To her, it felt like a blur. One moment she was in the laboratory. The next, she was dragged into the belly of the alien ship. Her crewmates shouted, but none dared to resist the Valorians. Resistance would have meant slaughter. Ilara's heart raced as she was carried deeper into the ship. The walls were dark and metallic, pulsing with a strange energy. The air was colder than she had ever felt. She had read about alien empires, but nothing had prepared her for being alone among them. The experiment. The Valorians had no interest in conversation. To them, Ilara was not a person. She was a test subject, a way to measure humanity's worth. In a chamber lit by pale blue light, she was placed on a platform surrounded by machines. Voices echoed around her, speaking in a language she barely understood. Though translators worked, she caught only fragments. Fragile bones. On soft flesh. How long before it breaks? Fear gripped her chest. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but her throat was tight. Still, she whispered, "Why me?" A tall Valorian stepped forward. His eyes glowed faintly gold. His scales shimmered under the lights. "You are human," he said coldly. "Your species has come to the stars. We test those who enter our domain." Her mind struggled to hold on to courage. "Test? How?" The alien only tilted his head. "We will see how long you endure." The machines activated. Strange currents flowed over her body. Her heart raced, her breath quickened, and her mind felt heavy as though sinking in water. The alien stood silent, watching, recording, analyzing. Time blurred. Ilara felt pain, fear, confusion, but she also felt something else, determination. She thought of her family back home, her friends at the station, the blue oceans of Earth. She held on, whispering inside her mind, "I will not let them see me break." Minutes passed. The Valorians expected her to fall quickly. To them, other species usually gave up fast. But Ilara did not. She held on longer than they thought possible. Finally, her body could not continue. Darkness closed in. Her heart slowed. Silence fell in her chest. Ilara Mendez, human of Earth, was gone. The 37 minutes, the Valorians observed calmly, marking the time of her death. To them, the experiment was complete. One whispered to another, weak as expected. But then something strange happened. At first it was small, a flicker of movement in her fingers, a faint spark in the monitor that measured her heart. Then a breath, weak, fragile, but undeniable. The Valorians froze. Their golden eyes widened. "Impossible," one hissed. The monitor beeped again. Her heart had restarted. 37 minutes had passed since her death, and now Ilara's chest rose and fell with life once more. Her eyes fluttered open. She gasped for air as though rising from drowning. Confusion clouded her face, but she was alive. The chamber filled with silence, the kind of silence that carries disbelief. The Valorians were shaken. Nothing like this had ever happened before. No subject had returned. Ilara sat weakly on the platform, clutching her chest. Her voice trembled. I was gone, wasn't I? The tall Valorian who had spoken before stepped closer. His voice, once proud, now carried a crack of unease. What are you, human? The fear spreads. The event was recorded and transmitted through the Valorian fleet. Commanders and scientists debated, unable to explain it. Was it technology hidden in her body? A trick of the humans? Or something deeper, something natural? Theories spread like fire. Perhaps all humans return from death. Perhaps their deaths are only illusions. Perhaps they cannot be killed. Ilara did not understand what had happened to her. She only knew she had felt death, and then something pulled her back. She was terrified, yet within her fear, she felt a spark of strength. Whatever had happened, it had shaken her captors, the Valorians, a people who prided themselves on domination, now faced something they could not dominate: uncertainty. The symbol in the days that followed, Ilara was kept under constant watch. More tests were prepared, but the soldiers no longer looked at her with disdain. Now there was caution in their eyes. Some even avoided her gaze, whispering quietly when they thought she could not hear. She realized something important. It was not just her survival that mattered. It was the story of her survival. The story was already moving beyond the chamber, beyond the ship. The Valorians had wanted proof that humans were weak. Instead, they had discovered something that unsettled them. Something that could not be explained by charts or machines. Ilara, an ordinary girl from Earth, had become the first human to show the galaxy a truth. Humanity endures. And though she did not yet know it, her 37 minutes of death would change the future of humanity forever. The story of Ilara's return from death did not remain a secret. The Valorians had recorded every detail of the event, and in their pride, they shared the findings with their leaders, their scientists, and eventually, their allies. But instead of strengthening their empire, the information shook it to its core. The Valorians were a people who believed in control. They valued knowledge, discipline, and order. Yet no amount of discipline could control the whispers that spread from ship to ship, from station to station. The human girl died. But she returned. Some called it a trick. Others called it a miracle. And soon, the idea of human immortality began to take shape, an idea more dangerous than any weapon. Life in captivity, Ilara remained on the Valorian flagship, under watchful eyes. They did not harm her now. Instead, they studied her. Machines scanned her body day and night, searching for secrets hidden in her blood, her bones, or her mind. She often sat in silence, staring at the stars outside her small window. At first she was afraid, but fear soon turned into something else: resilience. She remembered the moment she had died. She remembered the stillness, the emptiness, and then the spark of life pulling her back. She could not explain it, but she knew it had changed her. Each day she noticed the way the Valorians behaved around her. They spoke in hushed tones. They avoided standing too close. Some soldiers looked at her with open fear, as though she carried an unseen power. Others glared with resentment, as though her very existence insulted their pride. Ilara realized something important. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was a symbol. The council debates in the grand chambers of the Valorian High Council. The leaders of the Empire gathered. Holograms of admirals and scholars flickered across the room, their voices filled with tension. One counselor slammed his clawed hand against the table. "This is a deception. The humans use hidden technology. They wish to make us afraid." Another shook his head slowly. "I have reviewed the data myself. No device, no implant, no hidden machine." The girl's revival came from within her own body. "We cannot explain it." The chamber filled with uneasy murmurs. A third voice spoke, calm but sharp. "Then perhaps she's not unique. Perhaps all humans are the same. Imagine an army of beings who cannot die." The room fell silent. The thought alone was enough to send a shiver through even the proudest commander. The council argued for hours. Some demanded that humanity be crushed before their immortality spread fear throughout the galaxy. Others warned that such an attempt could end in disaster. If humans truly returned from death, then war against them would be endless. In the end, the council gave no clear answer. But across the empire, the seed of fear had been planted. Whispers among the soldiers on the ships and stations of the Valorian fleet. Soldiers spoke in quiet corners. "I saw the recording myself," one said. "She was dead. No breath, no heart." And then he snapped his claws. "Alive again." Another scoffed, though his voice trembled. "Impossible. No being returns after 37 minutes, but she did. What if we face more like her? What if killing one human only brings 10 more? Silence followed those words. Even the strongest soldiers felt unease at the idea. In their culture, death was final. Death was proof of victory. But what if victory was impossible against humans? Humanity learns the truth far from the Valorian Empire. On Earth, fragments of intercepted transmissions reached human intelligence. At first, the messages were confusing. Words like resurrection, immortality, and fear repeated through coded signals. It was only after careful study that the truth was revealed. Alara was alive. She had been captured, tested, and declared dead, but she had returned. In hidden meetings, Earth's leaders and scientists discussed the matter with grave faces. "We cannot explain it," one scientist said, "but the aliens believe it. That belief is already spreading. We must use it wisely." Another added, "We must protect Alara. She has become more than a person. She is the face of humanity to them." For the first time in history, humanity realized it possessed not just technology or weapons, but something far greater, a reputation. Alara's reflection alone in her chamber, Alara thought about the weight of it all. She had never asked to be chosen. She had never wished to carry the fears of an empire on her shoulders. She was just a student, a girl who loved stargazing and writing poems about faraway worlds. And yet here she was, the center of a storm she did not create. She remembered her death again and again, trying to understand. The darkness had been real and the silence had been heavy, but something within her had refused to stay gone. Was it human biology? Was it a mistake? Or was it something deeper, something about the spirit of humanity itself? When she looked into the cold eyes of her captors, she saw the answer. They were afraid not just of her survival, but of the idea of it. Fear itself was more powerful than any truth. The first rumors of war, the whispers of human immortality reached beyond the Valorians. Neighboring species, allies, and rivals alike began to hear the tale. On one world, a trader told his companions, "The humans do not stay dead. I heard it from a Valorian officer himself." On another, a scholar wrote in her journal, "Perhaps humanity has uncovered the secret of endless life. If so, they may rise beyond us all." The galaxy buzzed with rumor and speculation. Some species grew curious, eager to meet these strange humans. Others grew cautious, afraid of what such a discovery could mean. The Valorians, once feared by many, now faced mockery from their neighbors. "You call yourselves conquerors," one ambassador laughed, "yet a single human child unsettles your empire." The insult stung. Pride turned to anger. Alara and the scientists, despite their fear, the Valorians continued to study Alara. Teams of scientists worked tirelessly, hoping to find the secret in her biology. They tested her blood, her brainwaves, her genetic code, yet nothing explained her return. She was ordinary in every measurable way. Frustration grew. One scientist whispered to his colleague, "Perhaps it is not biology. Perhaps it is something else, something we cannot measure." Alara overheard these words and smiled faintly. For the first time, she felt stronger than her captors. They had all the machines, all the power, but she carried the one thing they could not control: mystery. The shift days turned to weeks, and the mood of the empire changed. Soldiers hesitated. Commanders argued. Leaders questioned one another. Fear, once unthinkable among the Valorians, had taken root. Alara noticed the difference. Where once guards had stood tall, now their eyes flickered nervously toward her. Where once they had spoken with arrogance, now their voices carried unease. One night, as she gazed out her window, she whispered softly to herself. They wanted to test humanity. Instead, they tested themselves. What began as a single experiment on a human girl was now a story that stretched from one end of the stars to the other. Alara's death and her return 37 minutes later had shaken the Valorian Empire, once the most feared power in the region. The Valorians had always ruled through strength. They believed victory came from proving others weak. But the story of Alara was a story that defied weakness. It was a mystery their strength could not crush, and that mystery spread fear like wildfire. Division in the Empire. Inside the Empire, leaders and commanders began to argue more fiercely than ever before. The High Council chambers, once calm and commanding, now echoed with raised voices. One side demanded action. "We must strike Earth before their secret spreads further," shouted a warlord, his scaled fist slamming the table. "If they cannot die, then we must destroy their world completely before they rise against us." But others shook their heads. And if destruction does not work? What if their entire species rises again? What if one death only multiplies into many? Then we will be the fools who began an endless war. The council fractured. Some called for war, others for peace. Some whispered that perhaps the humans were destined to be greater than the Valorians themselves. What had once been a unified empire was now a house divided. Alara's isolation, while debates raged. Alara remained in her chamber aboard the flagship. Weeks had turned into months, and captivity had become her new normal. But she was no longer the frightened girl who had once begged for answers. Now she observed her captors with calm eyes. She noticed their hesitation, the way guards whispered when they thought she could not hear, the way even scientists no longer looked at her with pure authority. At night, she thought about Earth. She wondered if her people knew what was happening. She hoped they had heard the whispers, that her survival had reached them. But more than that, she began to wonder about her own purpose. Why had she returned? Why had she been chosen when no one else had been tested? Sometimes she pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her heartbeat. This heart stopped once, she thought. And yet it beats again. The sympathizers, not all Valorians, believed in endless domination. Among the scientists studying Alara, some began to feel something unusual: respect. One young scientist named Salen often lingered longer than the others. His questions were gentler, his tone less harsh. One day, when no guards were near, he whispered to her, "You should not be here." Ilara's eyes widened. "Then why am I?" Salen hesitated, then admitted, "Because our leaders fear what you are. But some of us, we think you are not a threat. We think you are a lesson." Ilara studied his face, unsure if she could trust him. Yet his words gave her hope. Somewhere within the Empire, not everyone wished her harm. Over time, Salen and a few others quietly shared information with her. They told her of the arguments in the council, of the fear spreading among soldiers, of the Empire beginning to fracture. "You have changed us," Salen said one evening. "Not with weapons, not with power, simply by surviving. Humanity's diplomacy." Meanwhile, back on Earth, the human governments acted carefully. They had intercepted enough transmissions to know that the Valorians were divided. Some wanted war. Others wanted peace. Instead of preparing for direct battle, Earth chose a different strategy: diplomacy and information. Skilled ambassadors reached out to alien neighbors, quietly spreading the story further. "Yes, it is true," one ambassador said to a cautious alien envoy. "A human returned from death. The Valorians tested us, and their test failed." The envoys listened with awe. Some grew fearful, but others grew impressed. For the first time, humanity did not appear as a fragile newcomer. They appeared as something mysterious, something to be respected. The soldiers' doubts among the Valorian fleets. Soldiers began refusing certain orders. When told to prepare for an attack against human colonies, one captain hesitated. What if we kill them and they return stronger? What if killing one human means fighting them forever? His crew exchanged nervous looks. None wished to be the first to discover if the rumors were true. Discipline weakened. Fear spread. The once mighty empire no longer obeyed with perfect unity. Ilara's escape one night. Salen came to Ilara's chamber with urgency in his eyes. "The council is breaking apart," he whispered. "Some demand your execution to prove you are not immortal. Others say your death would only confirm their fears. I cannot keep you safe much longer." Ilara's breath caught. "What do you want me to do?" Salen glanced toward the door, then back at her. "Leave. Tonight I will help you." With careful steps, he guided her through the quiet corridors of the flagship. Guards turned their eyes away, either bribed or too afraid to interfere. For the first time in months, Ilara felt the air of freedom. They reached a docking bay where a small vessel waited. Salen placed his hand on her shoulder. "Go back to your people. Tell them what you have seen. And remember, Not all Valorians are your enemies. Ilara's eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me as more than a test. Moments later, the vessel launched into the stars. The Empire crumbles. When news of Ilara's escape spread, the Empire shook even harder. Some accused traitors within their own ranks. Others claimed it was proof that destiny favored the humans. Factions formed. Admirals who once fought side by side now pointed their weapons at one another. Systems once loyal to the throne declared independence, unwilling to be dragged into a war with a species that might never die. The Valorian Empire, which had stood for thousands of years, now trembled on the edge of collapse. Humanity's quiet strength, Ilara, eventually reached human space. The moment she stepped onto an Earth-controlled station, her arrival was broadcast across the planet. Crowds wept with joy. Leaders shook her hand. She was no longer just a student. She was the living proof of humanity's resilience. In private meetings, Ilara told everything she had seen. The fear in the soldiers' eyes, the debates in the council, the empire breaking from within. One ambassador leaned forward and said, "We must not fight them with weapons. They are already fighting themselves. We will win this war without firing a shot." And so humanity continued its quiet strategy. They spread the story further, turning rumor into legend. They let the Valorians destroy themselves with doubt. Ilara the symbol. Though she wished only for a normal life, Ilara understood her role now. She became the face of humanity's endurance. She stood before cameras and alien envoys, calm and steady, saying only simple words. I am human. I endured what no one thought possible. And if I can endure, so can all of us. Her words carried across the stars. To some, they were frightening. To others, they were inspiring. But to all, they were unforgettable. Closing of Part 3, and so, the mighty Valorian Empire began to shatter, not from fleets or weapons, but from the fear of one human girl who had returned from death. Ilara's 37 minutes had become the crack in the armor of a civilization built on pride. Now, as the Empire broke apart and humanity's reputation grew, a new chapter of history was about to begin. A history where humans were no longer seen as fragile, but as unbreakable. The Valorian Empire, once feared by all neighboring civilizations, had fractured under the weight of doubt. What began with a single experiment on a human girl, Ilara Mendez, had become a legend. Tales of her death and return, 37 minutes apart, spread across star systems, shifting power, alliances, and perspectives. Humanity had not fired a weapon. Humanity had not waged a battle, and yet, the balance of the galaxy had begun to tilt. Returning home, Ilara's journey back to Earth was quiet, but her thoughts were loud. She had survived experiments, captivity, and fear. She had witnessed the cracks in an empire built on pride. She had learned more about herself than she ever imagined possible. When her small vessel entered orbit around Earth, the blue planet looked as calm as ever. Cities sparkled under sunlight. Oceans stretched endlessly. Mountains rose silently in their majesty. Yet Ilara saw more than beauty. She saw a world that had never expected her to return, a world that was about to hear her story and change because of it. The docking bay was filled with officials and scientists. They greeted her with awe, relief, and quiet pride. She stepped onto Earth soil, feeling the weight of every human who had ever wondered what lay beyond the stars. The story spreads news of Ilara's survival had already reached Earth through intercepted transmissions and reports from human spies within Valorian systems. But now her first-hand account was even more powerful. She told the leaders what she had witnessed. The fear in the Valorian soldiers, the arguments among their leaders, the uncertainty that had shaken the Empire. She spoke of the whispers that had traveled across the stars and how her presence had begun to change perceptions about humans. Every word she spoke carried power. Every sentence planted seeds of confidence. Humanity listened, not just officials, but ordinary people as well. The story became a symbol of resilience, endurance, and intelligence. The galaxy's reaction. The Valorians were not the only species to hear of Ilara's survival. Neighboring civilizations, traders, explorers, scholars, began to reconsider their view of humanity. Some species approached cautiously, unsure whether humans were dangerous. Others sought alliances, eager to learn how a single human could change the course of an empire. Humans now carried a reputation unlike any other. They were not the weakest nor the meek. They were beings capable of enduring the impossible. The legend of the girl who died and returned became a beacon, a warning, and a promise all at once. Valorian collapse within the Valorian Empire, the effects were dramatic. Commanders argued over strategy, unsure whether to continue old campaigns or rethink their priorities. Admirals accused one another of cowardice. Systems that had once pledged loyalty now broke away, unwilling to fight against a species whose limits were unknown. The High Council was in chaos. Some wanted to strike at humanity directly, but fear held them back. Others argued for diplomacy, though their voices were often drowned in mistrust. Every decision risked making humans stronger in perception, even without a single battle fought. Ilara had become more than a prisoner or subject. She had become a symbol of the futility of fear when faced with true resilience. Quiet diplomacy, humanity. Took advantage of the situation with care. They did not boast. They did not threaten. They simply presented themselves as a species to be respected. Ambassadors traveled to alien worlds, sharing the story of Ilara's survival, demonstrating how humans endured challenges that others could not. They emphasized wisdom, patience, and cleverness rather than aggression. The result was astonishing. Some civilizations began requesting peaceful treaties. Trade agreements flourished. Knowledge was exchanged. Humans had achieved influence across the stars not through weapons, but through the sheer story of their endurance. The symbol of Ilara herself became a figure of immense respect. She traveled to Valorian systems under safe passage agreements, not as a prisoner but as a representative of humanity. Everywhere she went, eyes followed her. Some Valorians looked on with awe, some with lingering fear, and some with admiration. No matter their feelings, one truth was clear. She was proof that humans could survive what no other species could. She did not revel in power. She did not seek revenge. Instead, she spoke calmly, clearly, and with purpose. I am human. I survived what others believed impossible. Our species is not weak. We endure, we learn, we adapt, and in endurance we find strength. These words echoed across star systems. Every sentence strengthened humanity's reputation. The philosophy of resilience, scientists, leaders, and philosophers began to study the meaning of Ilara's return. Was it biology, fate, or something greater? The truth remained a mystery. But what mattered most was the lesson. Resilience could shape history. Humanity began teaching this philosophy, that endurance, courage, and adaptability were as powerful as any weapon. Ilara became the living example of this philosophy. Schools taught about her. Stories were written, songs were composed. Across Earth and among alien allies, humans were no longer merely survivors. They were a species to be respected and admired. A new era decades passed. The Valorian Empire never fully recovered. Some parts of it became small, independent systems. Others sought alliances with humans, knowing that cooperation was safer than conflict. Humanity expanded carefully, establishing colonies, diplomatic centers, and trade routes. They did not seek conquest, but they did secure influence. Every action they took carried the weight of their new reputation. Ilara grew older, though she had long since been free from captivity. She watched the galaxy change, the ripples of her survival touching lives she could never count. She understood that her personal ordeal had created something far greater than herself. Reflection. In her quiet moments, Ilara often thought of the 37 minutes that had changed everything. She remembered the stillness, the darkness, the feeling of leaving the world behind, and then the spark that had returned her to life. She realized that her survival had not just been about her own endurance. It had been about the endurance of humanity as a whole. One human girl had become a symbol of a species capable of enduring the impossible, of inspiring hope, and of changing the galaxy without striking a single blow. She often whispered softly to herself, almost like a mantra. We endure. We rise, we survive, and in surviving we change the world. The legacy, by the time Ilara was old, humanity had become known across countless systems as a species unlike any other. Not the strongest physically, not the fastest, but the most resilient. The legend of the girl who returned from death remained alive in stories, art, and history lessons. In alien archives, her name was recorded with reverence. In human classrooms, her story inspired generations. The brief history of alien war was no longer a record of battles. It was a record of endurance, intelligence, and courage. It was proof that humans could face impossible odds and emerge stronger, not through domination, but through the strength of character and resilience. And through it all, one truth remained clear. The humans cannot be broken. Closing, the galaxy had changed. Empires had fallen, alliances had shifted, and new histories had been written. Humanity had not waged war, yet it had reshaped the stars. And at the center of it all, quietly, stood Alara Mendez, a girl who died, who returned, and who proved that even the smallest spark of life could ignite hope across an entire galaxy.